Well, we're talking about our audio listeners and YouTube watchers. If you are curious as to why I am not composed, follow us on Patreon and find out why. That said, when we're thinking about our childhoods and growing up with like anime and manga, obviously our perceptions of what they are and their sort of their cultural and sort of origins, right? I think we begin to see how profound of an impact they anime has had on our lives, our careers, and of course just like our taste in the media we consume, right? For me, it's very much influenced, my taste in what I like. Perhaps not yet what I make, but I know one of you, amazing guest, has actually made a game that was heavily inspired by that, and has done other work like a Bleach 3.5 hack. But with that said, before we dive into this topic of anime beyond borders and sort of global, or at least the start of a conversation on global perspectives on anime, I think it's important that we, first of all, introduce you amazing guests. Let's start on our Twitch overlay, our YouTube overlay, to the left of me. Pam, who are you? Why are you here? Why are you awesome?
I feel like we do this all the time.
We do,
I'm really
and I
happy that
will
we
say
do.
it every time.
Hi, I'm Pam Punsalan. I'm also a member of the Asians Represent team. I guess I started the Discord and I kind of just, here's the baby, y'all take it, and occasionally call me if there's a problem. And they're all much better than me now at managing the Discord space. So I kind of just sit back and go like, yeah, that was me.
Yeah, I
But
did
the work
that.
was there, but
I
yeah,
did that.
I did that. That was me. I am the Dovetailer on Twitter, and a fun story that is relevant to the stream. When I went into college, I went in on the presumption that I was going to be a Japanese studies major. So I started in English literature, and then I wanted to move into a minor of Japanese studies. And I was honestly thinking about going to Japan and doing the thing. Most of my scholarly papers, if you actually look me up, don't look me up, but I'm just going to say it anyway, but look me up. Yeah, I had a lot of stuff about fandom, specifically boys love, yaoi, etc. And when I was a college girl, I know that I'm going to drop my whole soul in here, and I hope that my parents never find out. But my group was the group that started the first Boys Love in Yoicon in Manila, and we did it in the basement of my family business's building. And my parents had no idea. So
Yeah.
all they knew, because
Wow.
I asked permission from them and I was like, yeah, it's an anime con, the stuff that I watch. Yeah, totally
Yeah.
safe.
Cartoons.
Cartoons.
Cartoons from
Accurate.
Japan. Yeah. So yeah, that's my claim to fame, I guess. It was called Lights Out, and a lot of people no longer remember it, but we were the first, and we started the trend down here. Back in my day, I guess. But also, I do tabletop games. I swear, and I play FF14 a lot. That's why you never see me on streams. Like Daniel and Steve have to drag me out of Eorzea and be like, "Hey Pam, do a thing." I'm like, "Okay, I'm here."
You were literally like, hey Daniel, sorry I forgot to send you those things. I've been playing FF14. And my response was totally understandable.
I have mad respect for your conviction to this, your commitment to Final Fantasy 14. Like, I'm jealous. I want to be who you are. I want to be where you're at.
I will be streaming it eventually. I just want to fix my camera properly and my audio, and then I'll start streaming stuff. So you'll see me doing shenanigans in Eorzea, and you'll also see me dying to savage raids now, which is a lot of fun.
Okay, can you this is completely unrelated to the topic, but can you folks clarify what a savage raid is? Because in my head, it's just like, oh, that raid was savage. Is it like actually like called a savage raid?
Yes.
It's the hardest mode of the standard bosses. So you get four kind of bosses, and there's a regular mode that everyone can clear, and then there's a super mode called Savage, which like for that kind of 6-month period, that's your raid tier, and you're working your way through that. And some people will just clear it in a week, and then you do re-clears and you get really, really awesome gear. Some people will be like, oh, I don't even care. I'm not going to do that. That's me. Um,
And
really,
then you
I
have,
don't have time to read Savage with all of the other things I've got going on. I
yeah.
I did a bit of it in Stormblood, which was the two
Mm.
expansions ago now. Holy crap! But yeah, it didn't really gel with me. But yeah, it's the hardest content outside of the special ultimate, which is like a super boss that will take you 15-20 minutes to clear in one go, and you have to just like marathon progress your way through,
Yeah.
because like every new thing it does will just kill everybody.
Yeah.
And then so you got to kind of figure that out, and then you go to the next thing that kills everybody, and then you just kind of
Figure that out.
crawl your way through.
So your reaction to being super impressed by Pam saying that about Savage raids has now been put into context. That said, you said you've been too busy to do Savage raids. You're probably busy doing really cool things too. Liana, aside from like finally getting your hair done and looking like fly as fuck, why are you here? What do you do? Because I've alluded to some things about your work.
You
and we will
have.
definitely talk about that more.
Absolutely. So hello, my name is Liana. I am the owner, lead designer, only person on the payroll but not actually getting paid of Valorous Games, which is my company, my own creation. We created Valor, which is a tabletop RPG heavily inspired by the feel and style you find a lot in anime, specifically kind of the shonen action genres, where you can scream about your feelings and actually get mechanically rewarded, and then also just build whatever you want. So that's been kind of my passion project since my former college roommate and I started it back in 2010.
What is time now?
Yeah. No, 2005, because we developed it for 10 years, released in 2015. And now this is year 7 of me running Valorous Games, where I'm just trying to beg people to play my game because it's awesome and give me money, because I want to someday do this full time.
Having played it, I definitely think it is awesome.
Thank you.
It's so polished. Sorry to interrupt. I don't mean
no,
to interrupt.
we're
It's a super
don't interrupt the praise.
polished
Let's just
RPG.
keep throwing praise. Just
Yeah.
more praise.
Yes.
Yeah, and I really we spent 10 years on it for a reason. We wanted it to be good. We were I'm also like business and marketing and stuff like that. Like that's all things I think about too. And we wanted to make a solid mid-sized press tier game that could capture all of the desire that I know tabletop gamers have of playing an anime style RPG.
Yeah, and I want to dive back into that anime style RPG, because there's Valor, and then there are some other TTRPGs. But
then there are some other.
then there are some others. But before we get into that, Emma, you are our final guest.
Hello, yes.
Hello. Who are you? What do you do? Why are you awesome?
Yeah, my name's Emma Yasuri. I'm an archaeologist, and I've done this intro so many times, but I forget what I usually say. What's relevant here, besides, growing up in the 80s and 90s when anime was a particular kind of thing, which is different from now. I also study, research, teach about pop culture in general, but East Asian and Japanese pop culture in particular. So I, got a lot of stuff that from the academic side, still see some really weird ideas about anime. And there's this weird interaction between popular and academic that really becomes visible when it's supposed to be like a high level peer-reviewed professional journal, but they're still saying weird stuff. So yeah, I don't know. That was a bit rambly.
No, I think that's awesome. I think all three of you are here for a reason, because of the the contributions that you bring to the conversation, and of course to the community, right? I do want to I want to focus on a lot of the broader issues, right? Because one of the things we could do is we could talk about, what was that, big eyes, small mouth,
Yes,
that
Besem.
RPG.
That's the one.
We could talk.
That's the one.
We could talk about that. We could talk about a whole bunch of like sort of like anime inspired RPGs, like
Oh
tabletop
God,
RPGs.
someone mentioned made RPG. None of that here.
Or
no,
made, but
no.
But I think what's more important is we talk about the issues that I think are relevant to conversations that we have on the internet across borders, right? We're talking about like big eye, small mouth. We're still centering the conversation on the West. I think that's something we should certainly address, but I think it's really important to discuss different perspectives on anime. Now, before we even do that, oh my God, I just kicked my table. Before we even do that, I think it's going to be really important to kind of ground the conversation in when we're talking about anime, what are we referring to? Right? I think that's going to be super important. For me in the conversation, when, we're talking about anime, I'm talking about like Japanese animation. That's what I'm thinking in my mind. I mean, what about the rest of you? I want to make sure that we're kind of going through this live and while we're actually having this conversation, because we do have the luxury of this long form format. Emma, you're unmuted. Where does this kind of take you?
Oh, for anime in general? Well, I would say anime is a very large category with some internal consistencies. So I don't think it needs to come from Japan. And also very much aware that even in Japan, not all animators or people creating animation want their stuff to be considered anime. So I know Hayao Miyazaki is one of them. He has gone on record saying like, what I do is not anime. But most people in the West would be like, I've seen anime. I've watched like Princess Mononoke.
Yeah, that's what they'll say.
Yeah, so it's complicated, but I think it's defined more by an overarching style and set of conventions across genres that aren't necessarily nationally specific anymore. So I'm totally one of those ones who could be like, if it's done anime style, but it's produced somewhere else, it's still anime.
Cool.
Yeah.
So it's more of like a visual and storytelling style.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And there are some really common themes and design elements and all of that going on. So it's this big nebulous thing. It's sort of that I know when I see it kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like a feeling.
Yeah.
So we're talking about like those Netflix series or the series that you see coming in Netflix. Like there was that one, was it Trece?
Oh yeah,
Trece
The
was
Filipino
great.
one.
Yeah, the Filipino one. Like
I have feelings.
I
but we
wanted to
could
bring that up. Would you
put
consider that?
Damn, we got.
Well, why
Yeah.
don't we center it on that right now? Because I'd love to then extend that question to you. So Emma's answer to anime was that anime is like a complex term that encompasses a visual and storytelling style that doesn't have to be Japanese. So I brought up Trece, and I'd love to ask you, Pam, what your thoughts are. Because our definitions of anime are going to vary based on our experiences, lived, and how we've consumed it. So what about you, Pam?
Culturally specific it's pretty much impossible for a lot of the local Philippine audience to not say rather that like anime is, but it's impossible for us to ignore the fact that when we say anime, we mean from Japan, and we categorize other things more specifically. Like if you're into the specific Chinese stuff that comes from China, if you're into the Korean stuff that comes from Korea, if you're into Indonesian things, if you're into that, we go very specific into categories. But that said, Japanese anime is the big one for us. Lost my video. There you
That's
go.
okay.
Yeah. The Japanese one is the biggest for us because historically speaking, and this is where I'm going to put my old lapsed MA hat on, we've had anime since like the 1960s, 1970s. In fact, there is an urban legend that is actually true about Voltron. Was it Voltron? Let me go check real quick. It was Voltron, wasn't it? Yes, Voltron, Legendary Defender. There you go. Um, the original Voltron was censored by our dictatorship because it was a revolution story. And as you know, in the 1970s, Marcos was in control. So while he really wanted Japanese, oh, there, Voltes. There you go. Thank you.
I
so
was gonna
much.
say because Voltron,
Yeah.
Voltron was
Yeah.
specifically the U.S. name of Go Lion.
Yeah,
So-
it's Voltes 5.
okay.
It was a revolution story. And while Marcos wanted to invite Japanese investors, and we can see evidence of that in our city and in other things, especially at the post-war boom and all that, right? He did not want people thinking about overthrowing your government. So the Voltes 5 episodes is cut off at a specific point, and then they rerun. And you only ever saw the end of that after the fact. So we've had a very, very long relationship with anime that tends to disappear with most things when it comes to the Philippines. Like everybody talks about my islands in the same way. Do you have nice beaches? Do you people live in trees? Why do you eat pig's blood? Oh yeah, right. That's about the most that you'll ever get about the Philippines. But
Do you
The
people
oth-
is always a great way to
Do
frame a
you
question.
people?
Yeah, you know something
Beautiful.
great's coming when this
or
sentence
another
starts.
fun
like-
thing.
Filipino food is just some of the best food
Yes,
in
it
the
is.
world.
Laughing, yes, yes, owning it. And also the famous question that I always get: I have a Filipino friend whenever I get to the States, and I'm like, "That's great. I don't fucking know who your Filipino friend is." Like,
Do you know this person?
and I'm like, "No, but I do know that your country colonized me. That's why my English is so good." That tends to be my usual answer, and it shuts down conversations very quickly.
Damn, that's a fire answer. That's great.
But anyway, so I really can't ignore the idea that for us, anime equals Japan. Everything about Japan, its entire aesthetic, its cultural influence, and also the fact that we have a very rife political relationship with Japan
Mhm.
because our country was brutalized politically, if I remember correctly. An apology has been given, but no reparations for the damage. And that was a very controversial topic, and rightfully so, during the last before times pandemic sort of thing happened. And yet you have entire generations growing up on that. And what's interesting about anime for us is that it tends to be a gateway for some generations. You start on anime, you start loving the Japan stuff, and then you either stay there or you move on, or you look at the things from other Asian countries and you go, actually, I like K dramas better, or I actually like the manga from Korea better, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's yeah.
So where would Tresse kind of be categorized from your perspective?
Trese clearly went the anime aesthetic direction because they knew that it would be popular.
Mm.
That's my take on it. I have a lot of feelings that could probably be its own episode regarding Trese and Philippine urban legend and all of that stuff. Like I'll be polite now and summarize it as it did its job. Now, whether it's a good series, I don't know. Whether I'm happy with it as a Filipino creator, I'm not sure. And last I checked, the creators are now looking into NFT, so I'm really disappointed about that. And they did this whole like, but you can just talk to us, you know, we had no idea. And I'm like, should have done the research. I thought you were better than that.
Yeah.
But that's
Yikes.
yeah, that it's a bit yikers. And Tressa itself is again a controversial topic. So if you ask me about its relation to anime, per se, I'd say the aesthetic was a marketing choice, and it did not have to be. But since they chose it and it got popular, then I guess it's a good gateway for some people. It's also a great intro for folks who have very little context about the different cultures in the Philippines. So as a kind of Philippine mythos stuff 101, Tress is great. Will it hold? Is it friendly? I'm not sure.
It's kind of again that sort of gateway.
Yeah.
For folks.
But this time for the Philippines, right?
Yeah,
for our creators, right? So
yeah.
The other complicated relationship I have with anime, of course, is queerness. Because everybody knows that I'm flaming gay. And one of the first things that that helped me realize that was anime. Ironically, that's why I have watched, consumed, read, written fanfic and RP, a whole lot more queer gay stuff than I'm willing to admit. And some people might actually find me still on AO3 where people still read my 500 plus fanfic things. And if I mentioned a handle from DW or LJRP, I think a couple of people be like, "You're that bitch," right? So I was in anime for a long
We're
time.
learning so much about you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll cop to this. I was in that community too. I'll bet I'll recognize you.
Probably
There's
that's why
gonna
I'm
be
like,
some behind the stream DMs happening here.
I have to say that anyone who can say they were part of the AO3 community as confidently as you did is so powerful. And just like, I have to like be like wary now because you could ruin me. The amount of power you have. Oh my goodness.
so I could go into the BO stuff, but that's for
There
like
are
later.
layers to Pam's power
Mhm.
right here. We're learning about this.
I feel like this is really just like 101 about how all of the queer erasure people tried to do to Sailor Moon.
Yeah, I
didn't
mean
work
we gotta
remotely.
we definitely gotta talk about that. But before we get into that, Liana, and then of course Steve, gotta talk about like your perspectives on anime. Let's go to you, Liana, and then we'll end on Steve before we kind of dive into
Yeah,
things.
absolutely. Because I obviously I grew up loving anime. I'm a bit older, so my cousins were renting raw, undubbed, unsubbed Dragon Ball Z movies from the shady Asian video store when I was like 5. And we would all sit down and watch, the action and the explosion. I'm like, yeah, we don't need to know what the dialogue is at all. It's all here. We kind of get it. Like that's where we started. Like my cousin's cousin, which is something that Asian folk can really vibe with. But he actually had a Famicom. I'm pretty sure it was hacked because he also had discs that he used to. So I think it was kind of illegal. But like we had like a Dragon Ball Z video game that we would play when he was over, and it's like we really got into it early. My cousin got like the entirety of Neon Genesis Evangelion, which was a huge series for me when I watched it at 13. Don't let your 13-year-old watch Evangelion, by the way.
I think I was 13 or 14 when I saw it too.
I didn't watch it for the
Just
first time
because the
until I was an
protagonist is
adult,
14 doesn't mean that you should be watching it at 14.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I really it's been a huge part of my life. When I talk about anime, especially because I try and watch the industry, I like to see where trends are going because that informs what I'm going to do with my game. I'm very kind of a chameleon as far as how I try and get a sense for what the opinions are of a person. Like if I'm talking to someone who is that sort of like anime is animation from Japan, I'll be like in my mind, okay, I know what you're coming from, so I will engage you in the matter that you understand it. I'm personally very very open. I am happy to consider just about anything, and including video games, to be kind of inspired by or part of the anime spectrum, if you will. Just because it's thematically art, there's so much that goes into what we consider to be anime. Even just considering all of the different genres, of like the rom-coms or the supernatural horrors, or the shonen action that a lot of people tend to be more familiar with. And then even rom-coms have like the how old are they for. So I'm very open in what I'll accept as part of the anime conversation. It just depends on who I'm talking to and how our conversation is defining those boundaries.
Yeah, that's a good point about like also different forms of media, right? Because I think of one of my favorite video games of all time, Tales of Symphonia, was the first time I ever experienced a video game that had a big anime crossover in like its cutscenes, but also there was an anime that came out. love Tales of Symphonia on the GameCube. But yeah, that's a really good point about like. So your approach is kind of like I'll kind of read the room, see what's going on there, but also consider other forms of media, not just animation on your TV.
Yeah, I'm willing to entertain a broad definition of anime, but yeah, I'll read the room and because it's good to just try and respond to what the other person is talking about.
Yeah.
Less
Yeah.
confusion that way, and I can usually kind of pick up where they stand on anime, and from there it makes it just much easier to talk about.
Yeah. And one thing I think that is really important for the listeners or the viewers is that all of these opinions here are very much valid. There is no correct one right here. Each of them has their own context. So, Pam's, Emma's, mine, Liana's, and now Steve's. Like, Steve, what is your sort of take on this?
I'm so sad you said that because obviously my opinion is going to be the correct one and that everyone else is wrong.
Oh, of course. Sorry. What was I saying?
But no, I've been struggling with this for maybe a decade now of like, what is anime? Like, that's a question that's always been like bugging me. And you and I were talking about this, but I have decided for 2022, I am going to take this idea that I'm going to take labels and I'm going to try my best to deconstruct them. So my answer to what is anime is actually, I'm going to focus on what the term and label anime does and how it acts in groups. So though definitionally, like animation with roots in Japan, sure, that's fine. But I find that the term anime is used in very specific groups to drive very specific outcomes. So right now, in today's world, I find anime to be a flag or a label that people kind of congregate to represent a type of animation that seems on the fringe, that seems to attract people who are of a minority, where they find themselves gathered around stories presented in a very specific aesthetic way. So that's like a huge mouthful of terms, and it's actually very, very vague. But I feel like focusing on the value the term has in certain groups, I personally get a lot of more value out of it and get a lot more interesting conversations. Like, why does this group rally behind anime versus this group that is also using the word anime, but are rallying for different reasons? So for me, I have no answer, but what I can share is that I'm seeing a lot of evolution happen with this very specific word. And it's wonderful to just stop and pause and really see the nuances in there.
Steve here being the linguistic anthropologist, going in that way. No,
I understood some of those words.
That said, like, I mean, you could tell that like all of us are kind of approaching this from like different perspectives, right? Pam and I are both like, the Japanese origins, but for different reasons, right? Emma, this is more of like a stylistic thing. Liana, you're like, well, this is kind of context, and then, but also it kind of transcends more than just television media. And then Steve, you're like, well, this is also, I think a thing that I kind of like, that kind of stuck out to me there was that anime is a source of community and the value it kind of brings to people. And of course, obviously, we'll talk about anime and identity, although I suspect that's probably an episode of its own. I think this is sort of the scenario where we announce the sequel on the day of the theatrical release of something.
Stay for the after credits.
Stay for there's going to be like 20 post-credit scenes, and each of them is going to be an episode. But yeah, we'll have to definitely figure out other topics that we'll want to talk about and what we'll want to table based on where we're going. But one thing that I think is super important, especially since we're talking about different perspectives on anime, and all of us are like different parts of the world, right? And even though, Steve, Emma, and I, we live in the same city, our experiences with anime are very, very different. And how we consume it now is very, very different. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I know this is a topic, Emma, that you also brought up, was these terms you hear a lot in these sort of fandom communities, and it's translation and localization. I want to talk about that because I think that is one of the fundamental conversations that we need to have as we dive into, a more global understanding or a global understanding of the perspectives of anime fandom. But I really want to know, like, you specifically said that you wanted to talk about localization because you noted that the term gets used to refer to not just the act of translating, but also making anime available in different regions. Did you want to kind of like start?
That's kind of the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
So localization is interesting, and we had that video that you shared that kind of gets into it, but I think most people think of localization in terms of the actual like industry practice of translating, making it appropriate for a particular region, and releasing it for an audience that isn't in Japan. Like that concept of localization. But something that goes hand in hand with that I've taught about a lot is the more individual act of localization. So we refer to something like reader subjectivity, which is the consumer is a particular individual. They have their own context. They understand anything coming toward them through the lens of their experiences, their understanding of the world and the context with which they live in. And that's a form of individual localization. So at the same time as translation is happening and they're trying to localize to a particular people, there's then the consumer side of it where you have no idea how a particular anime is actually being understood and incorporated into people's lives simply by looking at the industry side of translation and localization. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think you really kind of continued that conversation about sort of identity and producing meaning based on something that you are consuming.
Yeah, and so every single one of us is localizing in our own way.
Mm-hmm. So
it's
localizing.
Unavoidable.
So there's multiple scales basically. We're seeing this sort of macro scale of it being made available and the mechanisms in which this happens. So the translation, the censorship, all of that, right? We've talked a lot about the censorship sort of side of things.
Yeah.
But then there's also that localization of how you not only consume said media and maybe said localized form of media, but also make it your own.
And for something like anime, perceptions of Japan have a lot to do with the localization of anime as well. So the video you shared, they were talking about people now complaining about more like leftist ideas getting put into translations of anime. Or some people are complaining about that there's an agenda being pushed by the translators themselves. And this is partly their localization based on their concept of Japan, which is based on weird stuff in anime. But it's like, you don't think that more liberal or leftist ideas exist in Japan? Like their first thought is that it's put in there by probably North Americans. It's like, that's not, no.
That particular, like that.
Let's dive into this.
I guess we're talking about right-wing politics in the American fandom for a bit.
Sorry.
Well, I think I think with the right, I want to hear about this right-wing thing, but I think it also kind of ties into this other thing that Emma, you brought up, this cultural odorlessness.
Odorlessness. It's a horrible term.
Yeah.
There are all of these ideas. So these aren't terms that are widely known or used. They are coming largely from media studies and cultural studies who have been obsessed with anime and manga and Japanese pop culture since it arrived.
Yep, forever.
And like forever, yeah. Partly because they were all fucking shocked that something that wasn't American was popular and that people wanted to watch this and that people formed communities and relationships around it. And it was just like, but why? It's from Japan. I think it's weird. What's happening? And that's kind of how the studies really started here, at least in North American institutions. So some of these ideas and frameworks that people are using to study or talk about something like anime are ideas from the 70s through 90s, when anime was still considered to be sort of like a thing for outcasts and weirdos. And it hasn't really gone away.
If I may add a bit on that,
Yeah.
like I think it's impossible to ignore that, like especially with that, oh, it's the lefties and the translators who are saying this. A lot of a certain kind of typically white, um, often male anime fan is operating under a perception of Japan that is still rooted in racism that goes back to World War II.
Yep.
Which I think honestly, Emma, you were kind of getting at that, but
Mhm.
we should be clear about that. Like the idea that Japan doesn't have its own LGBTQ movement, the idea that Japan doesn't have concepts like wanting to make things better, fighting for social justice, despite the fact that anime often in style is about rebellion, is about
resistance,
outsiders finding their place and rewriting the status quo. I mean, Revolutionary Girl Utena has it in the title.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
And you see this with American media too. There are a lot of people who unfortunately are just kind of media illiterate, and they will view a piece of media and they will kind of with your personal localization comments, they will fit it into the box that they themselves exist in. So and that can be very meaningful for people, not saying that it's not, but in doing so, often people will ignore the themes, the messages, and sometimes it's the fault of the series too. They didn't put their message out there correctly. It's not always, it's messy. Media consumption is messy, but there are a lot of people who will just kind of willfully ignore it. Or like with the Star Wars fandom, who thinks that the Emperor was actually right all along. I'm sure you love that, Daniel.
What the fuck? Sorry, go on, but what the fuck?
I'm also getting whiffs of like the Warhammer 40k fandom.
Yeah. Absolutely. Who think the Imperium of Man are the good guys.
Yeah, who think, those space marines, they're good. Yeah, or like there was this, oh my god. You said Star Wars and you brought this out. There was this person who is like a I guess a Star Wars fan, has a Star Wars fan Twitter account or whatever. And when Star Wars Visions came out, they basically tweeted being like, I love Star Wars, but take this Japanese stuff out of Star Wars. I don't need that.
Then you wouldn't have any Star Wars. Sorry.
And yeah. And they got absolutely destroyed on the internet.
I can imagine.
Like, absolutely destroyed on the internet. But that's this is kind of what I'm seeing, this sort of centralizing sort of the Western experience and Western understanding of the world, and then putting that upon Japan, right? It's
which is then where we get those issues with the studies and some of the terms that I brought up, but then didn't actually talk about just now, but I can do that later.
It's interesting to me that that's what has clearly occurred in North America. But for my country, we have a very uncomfortable localization thing happening here, because you've got at least 2 to 3 generations that believe that Japan is the shiznit. Totally ignoring the complex relationship that our countries have. So, and a lot of that comes from the fact that people look at Japan as the ideal. They look at that country as better than ours. Even their products are better than ours. So when we go into a lot of anime influenced things, it's often a lot of creators who do the natural process of fumbling through it and then finding their own voice, I guess, after figuring out that, oh, these particular things from anime and that huge broad spectrum that is anime don't quite fit with what I believe. So maybe I can change that. So that's how it usually starts. You've got a response from fandom, from someone who saw something very different from their own, and initially starts out thinking, "Whoa, they're so amazing. Why can't we be like that?" And then realizing, "Wait a fucking minute, it's a different country, it's a different context. It's not mine. It's not my culture." And then growing out of that and going, "Okay, I'm influenced by the following things," and being very specific about those following things. Hence the need for us to dwell in the realm of specificity. So it's I don't even know where to start is the thing. That could also be another episode,
Yeah.
like anime in Southeast Asia, right? Like I've
Yeah.
gotten a lot of interesting questions from Twitter, like how do you feel given that Japan imperialism has affected your country? And my usual response in my head to that is like, seriously, you a white person, or sorry if that sounds mean, you another Asian from outside asking me how I feel as if I wouldn't know how I feel, given that I also have my own perspectives here and that we are compared. Like there are two levels of comparison, right? There's
Yeah.
an actual political, economic, cultural comparison that happens, and then there's your individual personal comparison of looking at this wildly successful broad spectrum category and then looking at your own sphere and wondering what's going on here. Why are we not there? What are the unique, specific constraints that prevent us from being there? And how do we talk back? How do we create our own things? And where do we root our influence? And how do we grow that and create something beautiful, something unique, and something individualistic? So that's kind of like a teaser on what happens on the Philippine side of other stuff. Like I don't want to speak for my Southeast Asian peers because they also have their own very interesting perspectives on how anime has influenced them. So
I think that's just got to be a whole episode.
Yeah.
Let's just make that a whole episode.
Especially since from coming out of the West, where a lot of people do see Asia as very like consistent or just like a monolith. Some of the ideas that I've had a really hard time with, and if anyone's ever taken one of my classes, I will rant about it for probably an hour, is the idea of cultural proximity, where some of the scholars over here were just like, oh, anime is popular with other Asian people because Asian cultures are the same. So of course it works. It's like, but you're you're ignoring so much. What are you saying?
Wait, what?
that idea is really outdated, but that's one of the ones coming out of like the 80s and 90s that people are still talking about. And you'll see that echoed in popular places where it's just like, oh, of course everyone watches anime in Asia. And then the idea that it makes sense if anime is popular with Asian diaspora, but then it became weird when it wasn't just Asian diaspora that were into something like anime. And that's when they started doing the studies and being weirdos.
Why do they like this thing? How could they
Why do
possibly like this thing?
And then, you mentioned cultural odorlessness, which is so hard to say, which is evidence that it was never meant to be said out loud. It was really just written down as an idea. Actually proposed by a Japanese scholar, but the idea that anime is lacking cultural markers, or it isn't Japanese enough for people to pick up on that, and so it's readily acceptable everywhere, which people have now been ripping to shreds, paper after paper. And the idea also bothers me because there's a lot going on there. And
there's I do you think it ties into that other argument that you see a lot of like, but the characters are white.
All white.
The characters are all white.
No, they're not.
I think this is I think this is the perfect sort of like.
It was only a matter of time. So who had
segue into
on
that
40 minutes? Because this is going to come in no matter what.
This is that segue into the like, but they're all white. Edward Elric is white. There's all these different characters. Well, I mean the name, but we'll talk about that. But like the whole idea of like, oh, these characters don't look Asian, therefore they're not Asian. These characters are white.
As a non-Asian person, I'm looking at this character and believe they look like me, so therefore they are not.
Yeah. So what? Where does that? What is the response to that? Because that's one that. Let's face it. I'm sure we've all heard that from somebody in real life.
It's a pretty frequently Googled question as well.
Yeah. So like, well, let's talk about that. And And I want to be sure if anybody has like wants to dive in on this, like by all means. But
I was talking about deconstructing labels and being Asian, being white. These are labels and things like that. So whenever I get that or I see that question, like I try my best to challenge them. It's like, where is this question coming from? Like, what value are you going to get out of any answer here? How is that going to shape your perception of this? And how will you take that information and move it forward? And that's a really tough question. That's like a super difficult question to answer. And I'm actually not expecting an answer because I don't think any human being generally, unless you've given a lot of thought, can answer that on the spot. My challenge is that by trying to navigate anime, given that lens, what are you bringing to the table? And is your lens really going to do you justice when it comes to how you are going to consume and engage with this media? So when someone's like, hey, in Fullmetal Alchemist, are they white people? I'm like, maybe. What does that do to affect the story?
Yeah.
How does that affect you as a person who views it? Because I think that's way more interesting. Don't you agree?
Yeah.
That's Steve being like, kind of shitty, but also, that's how I go about it.
But it's true. It's like, why does that question matter, right? Why do you need to ask that?
And also, like, okay, there are two things related to this that I always think of. Is first of all, most anime, like I'm gonna say almost all of it, is produced with a Japanese audience in mind. The fact that it ends up everywhere around the world has nothing to do with the production logic or the creators' decisions. So creators are people. They just want to make something. They want to share it. What industry does with it afterward is something separate. But most of the anime, even that we find now, is made by really small companies. And no one ever knows if something's going to be popular. So there are white characters of specific European or whatever backgrounds. They usually say so or use a lot of like visual indicators to show that they are. So yes, there are white people, but you should be thinking from the Japanese audience side where the default is Japanese. So these characters, unless they say otherwise or really indicate through like dress and mannerism, are probably Japanese and seen as such. But like one of the weird and creepier ideas that comes with this, all of the characters are made white. Like, why are all of these Japanese shows using white people? Is this idea that Japan's trying to invade the West, which is really old, but persists. And so the whole concept of soft power was created with Japan in mind, and this idea of manipulating populations. And so thinking that these characters are white, and so therefore taking the Japanese-ness out and making it marketable to the West is kind of framed as this giant plot on behalf of Japanese creators. And you just gotta kind of stop.
It's that sneaky, deceptive Asian people trope that we can never seem to escape for.
Yeah,
we're either super sneaky or super honorable.
And also like the idea that the Western market is the be-all end-all of markets, and that if you want to succeed, you have to succeed in the US in particular. So of course you're going to target those markets, but here's the thing. No. Japan
it's
has
super
a
interesting
industry.
too, because you're seeing these things wrap around again, where you're seeing American media being accused for being made for Chinese audiences now too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of this.
People love that conspiracy theory.
I almost want to say like a cultural self-centeredness almost, where it's inconceivable to you, the white colonial power Westerner, that media could exist that was not intended for you. That something could exist that isn't yours to take, and that makes people uncomfortable to contemplate that maybe this isn't actually for me.
Let's there's another really great example that extends beyond anime. We lost Uh-oh,
Nope.
I gotta fix this. Give me 1 second while I fix the overlay. Give me a second. Here we go. Whoop.
I do
There
want
we
to
go.
jokingly, tongue in cheek, say that white people thinking that everything's about them. Come on.
Well, no, I'm not even gonna. Okay, well, here's the thing. Let's just not even just say this is about white people.
Sure,
Let's
that's
ju- let-
fair. Obviously, I'm being kind of
Yeah. Well, no, because I
reductionist
have a
there.
really great example. That illustrates sort of the West's and America's tendency to center itself in all conversations about media. So there was kind of a controversy that happened at the end of 2021, where a user whose intentions may have been pure or may have been to stir up controversy reposted a video from China's version of TikTok onto TikTok. And it is a farmer in Xinjiang who is eating watermelon in a cotton field. And people on TikTok got mad. People on TikTok got mad because they thought that this was a Chinese person playing on stereotypes. Right? And people went absolutely nuts on TikTok. And this is already at a time when there was a lot of tension between the Chinese community and the black community, right? Because of white supremacy and the model minority myth. People didn't even, Pam and I talk about this a lot. We talk about how reactionary we are. And one of the things that we're trying to do with Asians Represent is to make sure that, people take a step back and try not to be as reactionary. But being angry and reacting right away is something that gets you likes. And that's something that we all like. We want that little dopamine kick from getting, oh, look how many likes or how many retweets or whatever it is on TikTok. I'm old. You get, right? But here's the thing. In that video, that guy is literally talking about buy my watermelon and buy my cotton. Because in Xinjiang, they farm cotton. And they also grow watermelons in their cotton fields. And if you go on Chinese social media and you look up Xinjiang watermelon, you will always see posts of farmers with their watermelons and their cotton.
Yeah. Context.
Context is super important, but also the reaction of being like, how dare you? Right? Not, why is this being made? Where is this from? What is the person actually saying? Right? That's the same thing here with anime, right?
Yeah.
That's why we wanted to have, we want to do multiple episodes. That's why we want to talk about different perspectives in how we consume the medium that is anime to be inclusive of all of our definitions, how we consume this broad thing that is anime, but also how we react to things that we see in anime. Because the things that we see are certainly going to be different, right? Pam and I, for instance, our definitions of what anime or what we associate with anime is it's Japanese origins are completely different. Mine are just when things that are made here it's just animation, it's just cartoons, and when it's made in Japan, it's anime. But Pam's, yours comes from a deep history with the Philippines and Japan, something that I know nothing about.
Yeah, and that is to say, attached to my point that anime is not targeting the West, is to clarify that there absolutely is a history of using pop culture hand in hand with colonialism and imperialism. These are things that happen. So Japan isn't innocent. This is complicated. So Japan as a nation is not innocent, and as a cultural industry, it's not. But the individual creators within it are not the same thing as those higher levels. And then the history of what happens between Japan and North America and then Japan and other places is very different. So yeah, I try to say from the West, we have these ideas and they don't work for these reasons. So
yeah,
I don't know.
And I know that was I know that was a heavy fucking topic. But I think it really,
anime's all about the heavies.
But here's the thing: I think it really illustrates the complexity of this conversation and why it can't be a short form video and why it's a 2-hour conversation that we're having.
Yeah.
right?
First
If I
of
can,
many, I'm sure.
Yes, first of many. I know you want that, and we
I don't
will
know
do
if
it.
I don't know if we can dive into it, but I do want to highlight here that that story especially makes me feel a lot of tension because, for my experience in North America, anime has been a galvanizing point for how I have engaged with Black communities where I've grown up, because the way that anime has intersected and resonated with various racialized groups
Mhm.
has been
Mhm.
a point where we could find some common ground. It's Dragon Ball Z. It's Dragon Ball Z. But where we can have that ground and recognize how it's hitting us differently, but in valid ways. And then from there, and again, this goes back to how labels promote action, how these conversations then help us to understand our various communities and the systems in place in our world and how we live and engage and how they affect our particular people. The way that, you know, Asian people are represented in anime and how white people and other people perceive that, and, you know, are they white, are they Asian, these kind of questions. And then the questions of, are they Black, are they coded to be Black, was it the intention?
Yeah.
These are all very complex things with, I'm going to say, no answers, no clear answers. But the process of deconstructing and talking about and engaging with the media at that level provides us all with a way to better understand how we navigate our really real lives and the systems in place and the power hierarchies in place that do have extremely real impacts on all of us.
Well,
And
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, exactly. I mean, that's the point I was trying to make, right? The whole goal is to have those conversations and encourage them. But people just want to react, right? People just want to say, well, everything is about me and my feeling on this is the correct one.
Yeah. I wanted to share a little bit from the cosplay community. So when it comes to Dragon Ball Z cosplayers, there's like a lot of stuff that goes on. But the most positive interactions I've had are with brown and Black people, where we are dressed up in Dragon Ball Z characters, we're talking about it, and the absolute worst ones are actually the ones where white people come in, typically they're white people, come in and want to explain to me why my cosplay or other people's cosplays are either wrong or worth deconstructing at 11 p.m. at KatsuCon while we are shmammered. Not appropriate, but also this idea that just because I am reflecting this concept, this like fandom, they can just like have this moment with us and just take our time.
I do feel like we should mention too that KatsuCon is the premier West North American cosplay convention, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that is correct.
At least one of, if not the. And I know some things about the cosplay community. I won't put too much in because I know Steve is far more embedded in that than I. But
you're right. KatsuCon is like the premier, like the high end one. You could go there, and if you just like show up at KatsuCon, you're gonna see the Jessica Nigris of the world, and you probably won't be able to talk to them and things like that. And they're probably gonna have their shoots in very privatized locations and the stuff you would expect for people that clout and that like fame. But KatsuCon is a very, very large con that draws in a lot of people who are looking to be recognized for their cosplay. So to be there as Dragon Ball Z characters and to engage with all these non-white people and to talk about how Dragon Ball Z has like affected you and affected how you see yourself and your own racialized identity is a unique experience. It's wild, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, you know what folks should do? They should just go back and listen or watch episode 46 of the Asians Represent podcast, where we talked about cosplay cultural appropriation and things like that.
Such a great episode. I was so sad I missed it on air, but it's really good. It's really good. It's because we're kind of in there too, because we were talking about, you know, these are creators, they're creating things. I do think it is good to acknowledge too that there are cultural concepts that you know are being shared, and we mentioned the Black community, and something I do want to say is this is This is an area in which American media has caused some harm, in that a lot of our poor representation of Black people in American media has made its way over to Japan. And sometimes you get, and I'm going to use a very specific example because it's one of like the most blatant and uncomfortable yet well-intentioned ones I can think. You get characters like Panther in Ice Shield.
I don't know who that is. I have to look this up.
Ice Shield 21. So Ice Shield 21 is a love letter to American football. It is by, I believe, Ingaraki Boichi, who currently is doing Dr. Stone, which is excellent. In it, they encounter, they go to America because American football, that's kind of their thing.
Oh, okay.
And they encounter a character named Panther. That is his nickname, not his actual name.
Yeah, Patrick Spencer.
Who is gifted, as the manga says, with the natural running power of a Black man.
Cool.
He has a racism arc that plays out much like a lot of American media, in which his coach is extremely racist for traumatic Black backstory reasons, and they eventually hug it out. Panther is himself kind of portrayed as something of a simple person, in that he's very joyful, but he doesn't necessarily get all of the social kind of social niceties. Like, he kind of invades personal space. He goes out running or whatever. All of these things, because you can tell the author believes this to be wonderful representation, because this is what they're seeing coming over from the US, and it's like, I'm writing about American football. I want to show my love and affection for these people in this culture, and it goes very wrong. It goes very, very wrong.
Everyone needs to remember that Japanese people are only racialized once they leave Japan. So, like, do not expect Japanese media or Japanese people to be nuanced on these topics, because a lot of them have never had to be. So, like, you can see some really wild and inappropriate shit.
Yeah, a lot of the stereotypes that you see in anime.
And it doesn't even just affect the Black communities. If you really, really think about it, have you ever seen a impressive or nuanced or kind representation of someone from Southeast Asia in anime recently?
I can't,
because that does not happen.
I can't think of any Southeast Asian representation.
The last one I remember from the ones that I've seen is Yuri on Ice. And that's like the most kind one.
That's the figure skating one, right?
Yep. That's the last kind one I've seen. We basically don't even exist. We don't even get
Yuri on Ice was honestly, that one was very interesting because it was so well researched into the figure skating community, where the idea of people from different cultures kind of existing and getting along together was a big part of it. Also, the Canadian acted like an American, and it was wonderful. It was the Canadian figure skater had this like huge ego and was super fat, and it was great.
We take our figure skating very seriously here. Like,
but yeah, that's what I mean, right? We don't even get the courtesy of representation. We are invisible.
I cannot, and Steve, maybe you can. I can't think of an instance in which I've really seen Vietnam in anime.
Pretty much never.
I've got a memory hole. Yeah.
No, never. I've seen it in like other Asian medias, usually movies and things like that. Usually to show off a kind of deviancy.
Or war,
that's what I mean, like violence, deviancy usually, but in anime, no, it's much easier just to kind of erase that concept and go for something else.
I think the most recent Gundam had Davao City featured. I think Gundam on Netflix. Forgot what the title was. I think Chad would be able to bring it up for me.
Is it the Iron-Blooded Orphans? Is the latest?
No, there's a movie. There's a movie.
Which is so surprising to me, because I think if there was going to be, like, of identities to talk about in Gundam, which is a show about or an
There you
anime
go.
that's really
Hathaway's Flash. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
oh
Yeah.
gorgeous.
Well,
How about City
Gundam
Mister?
UC, which Hathaway's Flash is part of the UC, also had
Mhm.
8th MS Team, which
8th MS Team is
appears to be
awesome.
set in Vietnam.
No, is
But
it?
I mean, there's
It had a lot of imagery that kind of implies that, but the
Never thought about
characters
that.
don't really.
yeah, and that's such a shame because I think there's a lot of richness to the idea that Gundam is a story specifically about telling the horrors of war and how war affects every single human being at a very striated way that some people experience this way, some people experience this way. And I think introducing these cultures, the Southeast Asian cultures and identities, is a really rich way to approach it. I think Gundam has not done a great job of doing that, but I am hopeful and optimistic for the future. And maybe that's foolish of me, but I'm holding out.
I made I made the mistake of looking this up on the Crunchyroll forums. No.
Forums in general, I don't know, man. Like,
You know, so
That's the takeaway here. Dr. Yasue is just like, don't look at forums, and I'm like, I believe you.
it's like never read the comments. You know?
Yeah, so two things came up. So what I talked about that. First of all, one of them was like everyone's talking about Mr. Win in Hey Arnold, right?
Oh, geez.
And then I talked about, but then I you know how I talked about that in the last episode and how it's a really interesting portrayal of the West's of presence in Vietnam, right? And then the other one that was also brought up by Hamstuff Wind was Black Lagoon, which is supposed to be set in the Philippines. Although I think some folks are saying, at least in this Crunchyroll forum, that's one of the characters is Vietnamese. I can't
We just
confirm
told you
that,
not to
though.
go on the forums. We just
Well, you told me to go on it, but to not go on it, but I'm already on it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, too late. Too little, too late.
It's
Okay,
too late.
Gotcha.
Just like that song by JoJo.
Since I do have a broader outlook, there is a Southeast Asian portrayal I can think of fairly recently. It's in video games, by Square Enix. Well, there are two, one better than the other, and one's more South Asia. But in Dragon Quest XI, you go to what is clearly intended to be, and part of this is likely the translation. There's a city called Phnom Nhan. So with the spelling of the Cambodian style for the temples, but it's a pun. And it is a tourist trap where the locals, who are not, interestingly, they're not really dark skinned either. A lot of the Dragon Quest characters are portrayed as more light skinned in general, and that carries over to this region. But they try and swindle you almost immediately. Like merchants are trying to rip you off, and they have a temple that has this painting that's like kidnapping tourists and stuff like that. But it's not great. It's not great. And I knew this was going to come up again. Solidarity, Pam. The most recent Endwalker Final Fantasy XIV expansion.
Here we go.
Portrays
Yeah,
an Indian themed nation, which I can't speak to how well it did. I've seen generally positive response about it. But also before that you get Alamigo, and that is a lot messier.
Oh no, we can go there for also a series of episodes.
Yeah,
Horror of
Alamigo is
Stormblood.
definitely. I like Stormblood personally, but I can see why others don't.
I don't.
and Alamigo doesn't necessarily land super well. In that in their backstory, they were this kind of very savage and warlike nation that warred with one of the primary city states, and then they were captured by the major imperialist power. So you go and you liberate them, but Stormblood, being a messier expansion in general, doesn't get a good look at their culture, and they don't necessarily come out looking the best within the whole context of everything. Also, the big Alamegan character, who I personally I really like. Her name is Lise, and she's a refugee, so she did not grow up in her culture, and there's a story about her kind of trying to reconnect and failing a lot with her culture that I personally really vibed with, but a lot of people didn't. And also she is blonde and blue-eyed, and that is kind of weird. So there's just, it's messy. I definitely feel like because 14 is a more global game with a lot of resources and honestly a director who does genuinely care, they did a lot better, it seems like, with Razat Han, the more south. So it's kind of steps and things like that. But yeah, it's messy. It's very messy.
It's interesting because Favner and Razatan is, you get two different reactions from it. You get the South Asian communities that are like, holy shit, we're there, right? But you also get a lot of Southeast Asian people going, holy shit, we're there. So you have two communities seeing like all of these interesting cultural signals. Now, on the fandom side, there's a lot of erasure where I've seen some arguments of some people saying, no, this is mine. And other people going, no, this is my country. Of course, I don't have enough authority to say, no, this is from that country. No, this is from this country, right? But I do like the responses. I know that a couple of my friends who have lived or come from Thailand or Cambodia have actually cited it and go like, it's beautiful to see this on stage and to also see that Thavner as a nation, primarily brown people, or they're coded brown, versus how Alamigo was portrayed, where you have this very weird dissonance of like, there's a whole bunch of brown people, sure, but the main NPCs are all white. Like blonde,
light skin.
Light skin, right? Light skin is a much better way of putting it. Yeah, so they have blonde hair and blue eyes, so it's a bit what's happening here, right? So
I'm super glad too that there are Southeast Asian people who are really vibing with Thavner, because Thavner is wonderful. Like I loved it, the arc and Walker, and that means we don't only have all amigos, so we get
we get to go yay.
I'm gonna nod and be like, I know what these things are.
I'm not kidding, Daniel. Like I would love to get some people from our group and play through just the story and analyze a lot of kind of like the stuff they do, because it's super fascinating.
Let's just do it.
I tried it once. I have an account. I'll reinstall it.
Every Sunday we'll do a live stream.
Yeah,
like 14, and we just talk through it. I love that.
Okay.
I will wake up early every weekend.
We'll make the timing work.
Okay, here's the deal.
Chill stream.
Okay, we'll make it a chill stream. We'll make it work. We'll do it at a time where Pam's like wildly OP characters can help everyone.
No.
Because apparently I'm sensing that Pam's character is very, very strong.
Because you called
it because Pam does savage raids. I'm assuming Pam, your character is strong, right?
Don't worry, it'll level sync us down. You don't have to worry about that.
Daniel
down to my level.
Clearly is out of this.
One. That's my level. I know. I think I'm actually a higher level than that. I've got a character.
I will say that stream would be great.
I'm a real gamer.
But what I love about this conversation is that you have all kind of like to put my own ideas, which is the only correct one, and my opinion is correct, is to say that I love that you went into this tangent of like Top Fantasy 14 and the way these labels and the presentation has affected individual groups of people. And some people really like it, some people don't like it, they feel tension, and how that can hit people individually like that. That's great. And I think flows into what I was saying. But really the question I want to ask you is Final Fantasy 14 an anime?
Oh, Steve, we don't have that much time left.
That's where I want to go.
Steve poked a thing. Okay, so I think I had a Twitter rant on this, which Steve may have seen. So there has traditionally been a tendency in the Western World of Warcraft community to dismiss Final Fantasy 14 as a weeb game. Now, first of all, let's unpack the phrasing of weeb or weeaboo, as is the full reading of that slang word, which is the Western, typically white fan who is creepily obsessed with Japanese culture while holding no real respect, but believing that they do. It's every cringe anime fan that you've ever met, basically.
Super gatekeepy. Yeah.
I linked a video in our chat about it, and like it's very spot on because it's a comedy sketch, but it hurts. It really hurts because you've met this guy before. But
Oh.
the I find the attack to be racist, in that, one, it's a game made by Japanese people for Japan. Two, if you actually look at the game for like 2 seconds, you can see that much like a lot of Final Fantasies, they drew inspiration. Like the core inspiration for Final Fantasy, as I understand, is Dungeons and Dragons, the Western fantasy of swords and sorcery and knights.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, this is a Japanese interpretation on it, and it has Japanese cultural markers, like Emma has said, it's meant for Japanese audiences, but it's not, even within the context of like, and I see a lot of the WoW creators coming over. We're like, yeah, it's totally weeb, but it's cool either way. And it's like,
I see that a lot.
it's Japanese, and there are cultural overlaps between anime as we consider it, which is a very stylized and specific presentation, but is still culturally Japanese, and something like 14, which, well, it does get very epic and bonkers, not necessarily outside of ways that like the Marvel Cinematic Universe would, for example. The way it approaches it tends to be with an eye to some of how some of the Western fiction does it, because it draws a lot of inspiration from these Western ideas and fiction.
I think Yoshi P also went on record recently, or several times even before that, to tell people that there is no fight or competition between World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy 14. That a lot of FF14's baby steps after 1.0 were the team going, okay, we fucked up the first time. Let's take a look at how World of Warcraft is doing things and see how we can do our own thing from there.
He literally said Final Fantasy 14 would not exist without World of Warcraft. He's also apparently a god at World of Warcraft, top parse and in both
everything.
Of the games. And the man's insane. I
gotta add, unlike a lot of anime, Square Enix and so the Final Fantasy games are made. This isn't typical, but Square Enix is a multinational company, so they have headquarters in multiple locations. And they communicate throughout the actual production process. So the way like a Final Fantasy or a big Square Enix title is made is with the inevitable localization in mind.
Yeah, that they're going to going to broaden their audience.
Because it's really difficult to change those things. Like with an anime, you can change the script, translate it, do your best. There's stuff that will get lost, but it doesn't matter because you're a passive consumer. But with video games, because you're involved, things have to make sense to a wide array of people, or else it's going to get crazy.
The head of 14's localization team, by the way, is an American.
Yes.
Christopher Koji Fox, who he is not actually Japanese at all, despite having a Japanese name that his parents, who had, I think, served in Japan and really liked a lot of what they saw there, gave him a Japanese name, despite him being an American.
So it's not like a certain Marvel employee.
Oh my god.
Yeah, no, his legal name is Christopher Koji Fox, which was given to him by his parents who spent time in Japan, and they wanted to give him a little piece of their experience. That's another episode entirely talking about that kind of thing. But he leads, and 14 really is kind of more of a global production. The localization teams work together with the German and the French, I think is their other language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is kind of an oddity, and that is a bit of a rarity, and that it is very much built up to have this.
Oh, but I'm going to complicate this conversation even further when it
Good.
comes to FF14 because it is a global game, and yet we do not have a Southeast Asian server. Nor
Yeah.
is the Philippines even listed in your PlayStation network up until now, even though we have had PlayStation players since the 1990s. We effectively do not exist. And I have a funny story about that as someone who used to cover video games. Like I won't even call it casual journalism, but it's also not professional journalism because I have my own website, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we have one of the big esports and gaming summits that happen here regularly, even throughout COVID. But before times, you bring people over, right? Square Enix came over for the first time in 2018, if I recall my dates correctly, and they were shocked to see that this little brown country was apparently playing their game since the 1990s. They did not know that we were real. Any local Filipino player of FF14 is technically illegal because we can't even register our own accounts. The
Oh.
Oceania server is people say, oh great, now Southeast Asian players can play. We cannot. Our internet pipelines are different, so the ping will still be horrible.
Oof.
So
Yeah, I
that-
think
right?
I've seen there's actually a 14 content creator who lives in Singapore who was talking about that too. Because I think he plays on the JP server, which is
yeah, I play on NA.
yeah, because you're
Oh.
on Crystal, right?
Yeah, I'm on Crystal. Yep.
I'm on Ether because apparently I hate being able to log in properly.
I'm on Balmung,
here,
so it's
I'm here
worse.
trying to remember what my account login is.
Right, you are on Balmung, aren't you?
I
Yeah,
have
I'm
a
on
spreadsheet
Balmung.
for this, Daniel. Don't worry.
You have a
Um,
no, I don't remember what my password is, but you got my. If you have my login, I can figure out my password.
Yeah, because I know the Southeast Asian community, and I hope that you get it. Because like there are two big communities that I personally like. If you tell me that Mog Station proceeds are going towards these two servers, I will buy a lot more
Fuck out
cute
of that.
outfits
Yeah.
for my characters because I want Southeast Asia and I want South America to both get their own surfers because they really deserve it.
What's Mog
it's-
Station?
Oh, it's the
Oh,
FF14
we'll take this
online
offline,
news.
Daniel.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
just, look,
We'll take this
as,
offline.
As one of the
I'm
co-hosts
gonna-
of Asians Represent, I'm just trying to be present in the conversation and understand
Yeah.
it. But I will kind of like, Emma, you were gonna say something. I was gonna actually kind
I
of.
was gonna
rein it
say
back.
I'm gonna take over the show because
Wait,
Nice.
okay, well, like let's bring it back because I think, Emma, you made a really interesting point about this FF14 conversation, and you said that video games are active experiences and they're designed with that localization in mind.
not
Well-
all of them, but
well, not
Square
all of
Enix
them, but
specifically
these
does.
big ones.
They go in depth into their production
Yeah.
process and how they do these things.
And then you mentioned that anime is more of a passive experience, and localization is like a secondary sort of thing that happens.
Yeah.
But what did you want to add?
What did I want to add?
Yeah, you said
I
you
just-
wanted to take
I kind of wanted to bring it back because this whole conversation is making me think like not everyone is represented well or even represented at all within something like anime. So why are so many of us drawn to it? Because that kind of brings us back to some of our talking points. But also I was going to point out we only technically have almost like 10 minutes left.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think it would be. I mean, we've talked a lot. I think in
Yeah.
terms of like key takeaways so far. I mean, one of the big ones is obviously how Western fandom and more broadly, sort of Western consumers of media have a habit of centering themselves in discourse when it should not apply to them in the first place, but making it about them. I think we also spent a lot of time talking about how perceptions of anime, specifically, I guess in this case, Japanese media, are highly, like really, really depend on like where you are in the world and one nation's sort of relationship with Japan, right, and their history. But I think one of the things we should talk about is really like all five of us in this conversation are all fans of anime, consumers of this media. Why? Right? And I know that all of you wanted to talk about why anime resonates with people around the world. Even though there are these issues, even though there are these different perspectives, we're also consumers of this medium. So why does it resonate with you? And I know you wanted to kind of guide the conversation, Emma. So I'm happy
Oh,
to
I don't
kind of,
have to.
well, but I'm happy to like give the reins to you. What did you want to talk about with the sort of resonance of this sort of medium?
Yeah, I think for me it's a little different because I am part Japanese, and so it has meant specific things to me. But also, without getting into all of that because we don't have time, it's just anime hits different than Western media and other things I've seen. And this is a recurring theme in studies that people have done on anime fans and why they like it is because it's like it's different. Even though there's a lot of it and it's got a lot of things in common, it's not your typical Hollywood or Canadian American made TV show. And I've just found like the emotional depth a lot of the times and the situations that characters get into, even for children's shows, the facing difficult stuff and working through it and having to grow is a huge part of a lot of anime shows, even if they're super silly. So like there's a lot to like there. But yeah, I think what you're referring to is in our show notes when I was talking about what's referred to as either cultural or racial affinity, which has come to be part of the conversation when talking about why so many people, I'm going to say like non-white people, are drawn to anime, especially for the diaspora. And part of it has to do with being racialized and then seeing racialized media and finding things in common or appealing about that. And so that's what they mean by like an affinity. And that is part of my story in a way, but also, I don't know, anime is a connection to Japan for me in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Pam, go ahead. Sorry.
I think for me, my affinity is less cultural and racial and more queer. And that was at least how it was when I was much younger, because contextually, the Philippines doesn't talk about homosexuality or queerness. It's the dirty secret. So you'll have a lot of local Filipinos say, unironically, that we're so tolerant of that gay stuff. We just like love gay people. You'll hear that very often from us. And
it makes me feel better. We do that here in the US too.
All right, right. But like for us, it's there's also an extra layer of you're literally outside of the realm of God that is your country if you're gay. You have to fit into very specific stereotypical tees in order to be allowed to practice your lifestyle. That's how we treat queerness. Nobody talks about it. Nobody helps you through it. Nobody gives you practical advice on anything from relationships to even sex. Nothing. You will get absolutely nothing. You'll only get a lot of caricatures and a lot of parodies. So when you actually see cartoons or what looks like cartoons, anime when you're younger, and it has there is queerness codified in it, you finally feel like you're seeing yourself. And it's a complicated thing as well, because again, I've already talked about specificity and Filipino identity and all that. So their ideas of queerness are not our ideas. And yet it helps us, it used to help a lot of people like me learn more about ourselves by watching it. That's why I was like a huge Clamp fan back in the day, because that was literally the first set of series that went like, maybe not, maybe they're gay, maybe they are, holy shit, right? Who knows, right? And then it later moved on.
Canonically, everyone in the Clamp series is bi or pan.
Yeah, that was
right?
Yeah.
But like, and then it moved on to degenerate stuff. Like a lot of people say a lot of boys go for Gundam Wing for the mechs, and then you have girls like me that are like, who do you ship? Is it 1x2? Is it 2x1? What do you want? What's your shit, right? And then there was a huge...
That's Hero Duo, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or duo hero, because 2x1 is duo
Oh yeah,
first.
because people were into the whole top bottom stuff, right? Which is another thing on its
Thing.
own,
Yeah.
right? I don't even know. I'm like thing.
Yeah.
And you also even have Utena, who I can say with confidence that a lot of my non-binary friends watched that and realized I'm non-binary or I'm lesbian from seeing that series.
It's like, oh, wait a minute.
Yo, right?
Hold up.
Wow. Oh, or the galaxy brain moment of, am I this?
Ikuhara, I don't personally vibe with his work, but
Yeah.
the things that one creator has done for the queer community around the world is we would all hope to have that degree of influence in so many queer awakenings as Ikuhara does.
So it's that's where a lot of my personal attachment comes from, and it continues to influence what I do. And I would not have that space without this very complex, broad spectrum that is anime, right? Because my country wouldn't give me that. And it's only in recent history that Filipino media is really starting to be a lot kinder about queer representation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, representation in general, right? A lot of people actually get to see themselves in anime, right? Seeing Asian characters, seeing people who, I mean, while animated, look like you as like the hero, as the main character.
Not only look like you, but the way they work with their family and all of that. Like, I know that was very important.
The food they eat.
Or even just the focus on meals. Like compare, we'll say Dragon Ball Z with Gohan when Goku was alive.
Oh, he's actually just named Rice.
Yeah. Because Goku's kind of in and out. Also, Gohan was named after Goku's adoptive grandfather, who someone else named Rice, because everyone's named after food or underwear. Anyway, tangent aside.
Yep.
But seeing Goku and Gohan like sit down and just like murder 20 bowls of food each.
How many of you thought eating rice was going to make you strong?
In this sort of familial setting, whereas look at The Simpsons and look at how they will show the family like just watching TV and or like Homer sitting apart and taking his meal with his TV tray or something like that. Just even those small differences can really make a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the things that kind of bring me back into anime are most definitely the kinds of stories being told. Yes, there are things in anime that just hit different, like you said, Emma. Like when I watched Demon Slayer for the first time, I was just like, like, what is going on? Like, this is awesome. Aside from some certain characters, but like the action sequences, it was just beautiful in a way that I had never seen before, right? But then you go and look at like, and this is like, the four of you know, my partner is super into Naruto. She's actually watching it right now. Like, I've been texting her trying to be like, hey, I've been texting her being like, hey, get ready to bring up Marla, and she's watching Naruto.
Yeah.
I don't. Sorry, patrons. Anime got in the way. But like for me, the thing that I really love about anime is a certain kind of character that you don't see a lot in Western media, and it's the characters that just try, just keep trying. And you don't see that, right? I mean, the classic anime example is Rock Lee. Like, Rock Lee versus Gaara.
Love Rock Lee
I fucking love Rock Lee. He's the best character in Naruto.
I don't even
and nobody
like
will
Naruto,
tell me otherwise.
I love Rock Lee.
Rock Lee's the best character.
I love Rock Lee.
Rock Lee's the best character. I mean, for so many reasons, because you look at Rock Lee and then you look at, like, his sensei.
Gotta add that to your website.
Add it to my fan website.
Oh, deep cut.
Add that to my fan website. But, like, you see Rock Lee, and so many characters are Rock Lee in other series, right?
Yeah.
Rock Lee is a trope, right? And
it's an archetype.
It's an archetype that I also really enjoy. Do I see that in Western media? No. That's why I gravitate to characters like Zane Carrick in Star Wars, the Knights of the Old Republic comic. That's why I gravitate towards, Kanan Jarrus from Star Wars Rebels, right? Because they are that Rock Lee archetype. And I think I talked about this loud enough that my partner heard. And so we're going to get Marla. But yeah, for me, it's like anime hits different, but also the stories. The types of character archetypes are not those that you see in a lot of Western media, for me at least. What about the rest of you?
As Marla is brought up here, I'm going to add on, based on my idea that, labels are meant, in my opinion, to be deconstructed for greater good. My homework for our listeners here is to take these concepts, these conversation points here, and to apply them to other animated forms of media, especially those, if you're a Western listener, the produced in the West. So, for example, Legend of Korra, Avatar: Last Airbender. Take a look at that and just, take these ideas and these thoughts and see if they apply there and how they might resonate with these pieces of media, because I think there's a lot of value to be had. I'm not going to answer the question, is Legend of Korra an anime? Because I don't find that very valuable. But what I found very valuable is the things that make people love anime. Are they present in Korra? Or have they been changed to resonate with a certain audience? How did that progress? What is the evolution? And how does it make you feel in the end?
Anime is all
to
about
throw a few words on the pile too before Marla, or
no, but Marla's here, but it's okay. No, I want to hear like Pam and Liana, because you are our guests here alongside Emma. I want to hear your why does anime resonate with you? We've got time. Let's do this.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm gonna go then. So, because I know, for me, it's kind of weird. I definitely agree a lot with Emma, and seeing characters like yourself. It's also very interesting with some of what Pam brought up about the queer culture. I spent most of my life thinking I was a straight man. I was not. So being a gay trans woman, I'm going back and I'm seeing all of this LGBT stuff with kind of a fresh eyes and seeing how much it affected me, even though I didn't understand what it was doing to my brain at the time, which is super interesting. And just kind of that presence. I've always been around the yaoi fandom, and I was always like, well, yeah, of course I'm not super into it. I'm a straight guy, even though I find it kind of amusing. Whereas now I'm like, oh, I found it amusing because I was just happy for my girlfriends who actually like guys. I just don't have interest in them myself. So just kind of those schema shifts. I also anime is generally a bit better with its female characters. I have a lot of complaints, but comparatively to Western media, I feel like female characters who've always kind of been my favorite. Funny how that works out. But being able to see these really cool, awesome femme characters is something that really resonates with me, something I really appreciate, and something that while having problems is just so much better in general than in Western media. And they seem to be a bit more likely to get top billing, just because I think they have the shoujo, the shoujo market is a big one. We're making these specifically for women, which you don't, you kind of have that with US media, but especially with the rise of the blockbuster, we've seen that kind of dry up. And also the idea of having a female lead in a shonen for boys series, and she's the main character and she's an action hero, or she's like an angry Scottish witch who's also an idol who shoots dragons, made by the Bleach guy.
That's right. That's right. I forgot about
I loved
that
those
series.
characters. Those two were great. They were total chaos gremlins, and he bleached all over it at the end. Yes, that is a proper a verb here, and those who've seen the very last part of that know what I'm talking about. But it's just cool. It's cool to see cool women who are awesome and strong and engaging and have personalities that sometimes don't even involve men. Occasionally, it's really nice.
It's what I thought Sword Art Online was going to be. but didn't get that. That's what I thought it was going to be with Asuna. Ruined it.
But yeah, it's just it's fun. It's fun. It's very fun. And I feel like sometimes Western media forgets to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That said, I know, Steve, you got to step away for a second. No worries, because there are some folks that we have to thank, and we had Marla up here, and Marla is coming back up because my partner paused Naruto to come and bring up our very round cat. But that said, while Steve is out, it's just going to be me on screen, folks. We have a lot of folks to thank. Marla is coming up. I could hear her screaming in protest. Not screaming, just squeaking in protest. Here comes Marla. Marla, why don't you tell us what your favorite character in Naruto is? No, she wants to look away.
She turned
Choji?
away. That
Is it
either means
Choji?
Sasuke
Is
or
it Choji?
Gaara.
Do you use the expansion jutsu, or do you just like Sasuke?
She's a butterfly chakra.
She is a butterfly. Oh. Were you watching Naruto?
No.
No.
Superstore.
Oh, you're watching Superstore. Another good show you should watch. But Marla, oh, you're just paw on me. Cool. We have a lot of people to thank. Thank you so much for our Guardians of the Realm, Brooke Bright, Pixel Grotto, Jeremy, the best writer on D&D Beyond, Daisy May, and of course our most honorable patrons, and the most honorable Metal Weave Games and the most honorable Valorous Games. Well, Marla, okay. She's trying to escape. Oh, because Marla wants to go play Valor, the heroic roleplay system, right? Dungeon Glitch / Matt, you are super honorable, and the most honorable ×2 Epic Impulse. And Marla, say hi to everyone.
Oh, she looked at the camera.
She looked at
briefly.
she looked at the camera. Marla, one
She
more
looked at
time.
the camera and was like, "Oh, nope."
Marla,
thank you.
Marla, no, one more time.
Oh, she's mad.
No, okay,
She's
fine.
like, why?
Why? Pam, Liana, Emma, thank you for joining us. Your socials are all up here. They're also going to be in the description on your, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube. Thank you, folks, for joining Steve and I. I think we should definitely do a follow-up episode. I think we should do a follow-up on...
We have to.
I mean, we have to. We have to. I think we need to do a
It's
follow-up
so many
on...
plot hooks. We have to follow through
I know.
with all of them.
Well, here's the thing. I think we definitely need to do an episode that's just anime and Southeast Asia. I really think we need to.
Agreed.
And I think that I should just not be present and I should just be producing.
We need one on gay. We need to talk about the gay.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Queerness in anime.
Well,
is a
what
must.
if we talked about...
Yes.
I wonder if, because we also wanted to talk about like queerness in wuxia, what if we talked about, would it be too much of a broad topic if we talked about queerness in Asian pop culture?
Yep, too much.
Too
Yep,
much?
Yeah,
just
it's
focus
okay,
on anime.
so what we'll
I
do
didn't even
is-
talk about Eva. So
Yeah, I will, on our show notes, I will put a link to this Eva thing as kind of a preview, we should say. So let's say we'll do follow-up episodes and we'll
I
say
do think
anime
we
in
should
Southeast
also do a
Asia,
fandom episode, by the by.
Yes.
Oh,
okay,
Especially
okay.
because we have one of the
fandom.
premier cosplayers of Asian Represent right here, right now.
Also,
Look at the-
fandom is
look-
a huge
Also, can we
topic.
just
Look at
talk
us
about
behind the scenes.
how Pam just dropped like that they like coordinate all of these underground cons?
Yeah.
Can we just talk? Can we just
Very
mention
Just at
that
the
again?
center of all of these things.
Yeah, and then Pam was just like, "You'll recognize me if you're on this website.
yeah,
You'll
I'm
recognize
getting
my
that
work."
username after this, by the way.
I'm telling you, their power is
Amazing.
like so much. Like you can't even comprehend their power.
Yeah, I was just like, Pam's like, "I'll shut you all down. I own the Asian Represent server. It's over.
It's true.
I pull the plug." That's Pam. So Pam, you can do whatever you want on the show.
Oh gosh.
But that said, let's do an episode. We got anime in Southeast Asia, fandom. We'll do what else did we say? Oh,
Queerness.
queerness in anime. One of the things we've been trying to do for a really long time, and like Steve, you and I have tried to talk about how we might navigate this. I think anime is a really good primer to have a conversation about the Black community and the Asian community.
Yeah, we touched on that a little bit today.
Yeah,
And I think that is a very special episode that we should plan
that,
for.
that's a whole episode. I think we just need to find the guests. We need to find the guests. We need to put together a panel. But I think we need to do that, and I think anime is the medium to which we should do it.
Absolutely agree. I would love to do a panel between us and some Black communities. I think it's a very important conversation to have.
And
I think
also
when I was first pitched this, I said it might be cool to include a Black person even on this
You
one
did.
episode. So
You did. But that's I think we should do like just an episode on that alone.
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing. But that said, thank you folks for tuning into this episode of Asians Represent. I know this was a really, really heavy topic. So please, make sure you take some time to watch an anime that's not gonna hit you in the heart. Watch something
Try
light.
and find one.
Try to find one.
try to find.
I,
I dare you.
I honestly can't.
No, I can name like light animes. Go watch Cells at Work. Enjoy it. Just like
I like Way of the House Husband.
Okay.
watch Way of the House Husband. Heaven's Design Team has the best trans woman in all of anime
Okay, wait. Let me just write this down. Heaven's
because
Design.
she's just there. And
I have nothing to offer that is smart, but Gintama. Watch Gintama.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
Yeah,
the shit.
Heaven's Design Team is edutainment. It's a lot of fun. It's about angels creating animals, and God being the kind of finicky and vague commissioner.
Okay, anything else? Anything else?
Ooh, there's so many just like light fun animes.
Let's take it. Let's get it. Let's go. Let's get out of this with 5. So we've got
But,
Heaven's Design
light
Team.
fun can still hit you in the feels.
Yeah, that's true.
Azoken. I personally like Shirobako, but it will probably stress office workers out. Shirobako is my favorite series ever. It's an anime about creating anime.
Oh, like
So it's
Wow.
like production company dealing with the artiste director who's kind of a nut job.
it's
and
an anime about crunch.
the main character at a lot of strong female leads, my
Sweet.
thing. And it's about these girls who grew up who went through college wanting to make anime together, and then them getting into the industry, following the lead who's production basically. So she's wrangling cats, trying to actually get anime out the door.
What is this series called?
Shirobaka.
I'll add that to
Remind-
the list.
Reminds you of Genshiken too, about
Genshiken,
an
yeah.
otaku club.
I love Genshiken was
Genshiken.
my original favorite.
Great ice of life.
I have
Really good.
issues with Genshiken 2's Hato portrayal. I think it could have been better because Hato should be a trans woman. And I have very strong opinions about that, but it's not bad. But
I see what you're saying. I'm gonna go back and rewatch it because now that you said it, like, okay, yeah.
Ooh, Prince of Tennis.
Oh my god, don't get me started on
That one's for you, John. But that said, we got some takeaways. We'll add some more recommendations. We'll put them in the show notes. Again, thank you folks for just having this conversation. Excited to have more of them. And for all of you listeners and viewers, thank you.